Hello, back again. This is Jenny on Jen's Books. I thought it would be nice to start talking about some of the books that I've read in January and give you some thoughts on them. I said in my previous email that I managed to read 12 books in January. I have to be honest, full disclaimer, I only actually managed to read 11 when I rechecked my list. But in my defence, one of those is Outlander, and as that's over 800 pages long, I can live with the fact that that might take me into February as well. So I thought today I might start by talking about 5 of the books that I've read, give you some thoughts. It'd be really interesting to know whether any of you have read these books and whether you agree with what I'm saying about them or whether you disagree, or any books that you think I might enjoy based on these particular choices. So first of all, we've got How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I read this right at the end of 22, and it actually turned out to be one of about 4 books on the theme of the plague that I read in a row, which was probably a bit too much. I read The Sea of Tranquility after this, and I think it suffered for having been read after this particular book. But it's basically a collection of short stories, interweaving short stories around a dystopian future where people are having to adjust to loss on a really large scale. So we get introduced to a range of different characters. I think one of the stories that really stuck with me was the second one, which is about a theme park for terminally ill children. I think probably this wouldn't be a book for everybody. It is really dark, but the prose is so beautifully written, and it's so imaginative and so ambitious that I think a lot of readers would really enjoy it. One of the other short stories is about a science lab where they're doing experiments on pigs, so they can use materials from the pigs' organs, etc., for transplants for some of the children who are sick with the plague. But one of the pigs begins talking and shows real intelligence, and it's what happens to that pig. So there's a really broad range, and there's another one that isn't clear actually what it's about at reading, and I don't want to give it away, but hugely imaginative, incredibly moving, and this is a book that is going to be staying with me for a long time, you know, after I've read it. I would really recommend it, but as I say, not going to be for everybody, but incredibly varied stories, but all linked and all interweaving. So you'll be introduced to one character, and then you'll come back to them later on, so there's sort of connections between them, but a really beautiful book, and I would have said this was sort of like a 4.5 out of 5 for me, and really enjoyed it. And one of the benefits of short stories as well is it's one of those forms that you can pick up and put down, and you can feel quite pleased with yourself when you finished a chapter. But if you wanted to, I just read this within a few days. I thought it was fantastic. One of the other things I do is I read quite a bit of non-fiction, and I have quite an interest, a macabre interest in death. This is a book that I read recently. It's called What Remains by Rupert Callender, and it's actually the memoir of a radical undertaker. It was written in 2022, and it's about his life, his experiences as a child and growing up, that lead to this unexpected decision to become an undertaker at the age of, I think it's about 29, his late 20s. And there's kind of a theme of railing against the establishment, railing against the traditional Victorian funeral, and bringing in a sort of more people-focused, softer, holistic technique of dealing with families. So I found this really interesting. It wasn't what I expected it to be, but I thought there were some really beautiful insights into death and dealing with death and grieving, that will really stick with me. And it was quite interesting. He's had a really varied background. You know, he sort of takes you through his journey to the industry, through an obsession with acid house, through his attendance at public school and creating corn circles. So lots of varied elements that he brings into it. But I thought it was really lovely, and I thought it'd be nice to read out just a little bit from the opening as well, about people coming face to face with lost loved ones for the first time in a funeral parlour. At first, you brace yourself for them to open their eyes. That is the conditioning of horror films. That goes, that expectation, and instead is replaced by a deepening sorrow, with the understanding that this is the last thing they are going to do, no matter how much you stare at them. There it is, the boomerang of pain that is grief. I'm hurting so much. What will stop this hurt? This person coming back? They will not come back. I hurt so much. Fud, 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 over and over again. So it feels really personal. And as I say, the insights into how people grieve was really fascinating to me to read about, as well as the industry generally. Next, we have a series of short stories, Cursed Bunny. I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of fans of BookTube. This is by Bora Chung. It was translated by Anton Her from Korean, and it was shortlisted in 22 for the International Booker Prize. So it's a book that's on a lot of people's radars. And I put off buying this book to begin with because I'd been warned that it was quite dark and uncomfortable to read. But it wasn't as uncomfortable as I imagined it was going to be. Again, this is a book that's probably not going to be for everybody, and there is upsetting material in here. But I actually really enjoyed the stories that are included. There's a sense of the fairy tale gone wrong, you know, the moral tale that seems to come out of these stories. I mean, the first story is about a lady whose ablutions come to life and start plotting against her and keep appearing out of the toilet. And so there's quite some really imaginative and unusual ideas, but there are other stories that feel much more traditional in the form of fairy tales. So there is one about a man who finds a fox that bleeds gold, and it's just there's that real sense of familiarity, but that the content is completely new and fresh. These are stories about fetish, about being a woman, about karma, but really unusual, but enjoyable. But as I say, wouldn't be for everybody, but I would recommend this as a book. And again, I'd probably give it about 4 stars out of 5. And it'd be interesting to know what other people thought about Cursed Bunny. This is Elif Shafak, The Island of Lost Trees. This was written in 2021, so slightly older book. It was shortlisted for the Costa Award. And this is a book that I picked up because I'd heard lots of good things about it, lots of good reviews, and I was really interested in the historical context of the novel, which takes place in the 70s in Cyprus, which was an island that was split between the Turkish and the Greeks, with a UN border running down the middle. And essentially this is a love story. It's a story about a Greek called Kostas and a Turkish lady called Daphne who meet across the divide. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet situation, star-crossed lovers, if you will. And so a lot of the action takes place back in 1974, but then we're also seeing these events through the eyes of Kostas and Daphne's daughter, Ada, back in the current time in the late 2010s, we're told. And it's about inherited grief. It's about inherited trauma. Ada knows very little about what's happened about her life, the life of her parents. All she knows is that she's lost her mum, and she's feeling really adrift, and kind of out of place in terms of her nationality and her identity. So it's a really interesting exploration of her joining her roots, really investigating her past through the past of her parents. I found that the aspects, the sections in the historical time period in the 1974 particularly interesting, and those are the areas I kind of wanted to know more about what had happened politically and socially in that time in Cyprus. I found it really fascinating, but I would have liked a bit more of that. One of the things that does stand out about the book, which I think was quite unusual, is one of the characters is actually a fig tree. So it's a first person, it's the only first person narration in the book. And when I first started reading the book, I found that it took me out of the moment. I found that quite difficult and jarring. But I began to really enjoy these sections written from the fig tree's point of view, and how the fig tree is kind of the thread that runs all the way through the history to the current day. So it kind of made sense. And I was reading another book alongside this one, and the other book was one of those books you can sort of, race through the pages. They're really easy to read. But I had to really change my pace when I came back to The Island of Lost Trees. It's one that deserves a lot of consideration and time when you're reading it. The prose is just really beautiful. And to give you an example of the voice of the tree and the kind of prose that you're going to be experiencing, there's a huge amount of descriptions of nature here, so people who really like nature writing would really love this book. Here is how I remember it: golden beaches, turquoise waters, lucid skies. Every year sea turtles would come ashore to lay their eggs in the powdery sand. The late afternoon wind brought along the scent of gardenia, cyclamen, lavender, honeysuckle. Branching ropes of wisteria climbed up whitewashed walls, aspiring to reach the clouds, hopeful in the way only dreamers are. When the night kissed your skin, as it always did, you could smell the jasmine on its breath. The moon, here closer to earth, hung bright and gentle over the rooftops, casting a vivid glow on the narrow alleys and cobblestone streets. So if you really like that really deeply visual writing, lots of detail, lots of specific observations about place, all those sensory details, then this is a book that you're really going to love, and it really evokes a sense of place beautifully in the writing, and the loss of that sense of place and the loss of identity. So again, there were things about this that I found not frustrating. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I'd definitely give it 4 stars, but I wanted to know more. I almost wanted a sequel, really, to tell me more about this family and what happened to them in the past and what was going to happen in the future. Last of all, I wanted to mention Hex by Jenny Fagan. This is a really short read, as you can see. It's only 100 pages. I read it in one sitting. I devoured it. And again, this is a book that does it does require a bit of a slowed down pace of reading to take it all in, and a book that I think I'm really going to want to read again because there's so much to it. It's beautiful. It's short, but it packs a punch. And this again was published in 2022, and Jenny Fagan wrote a book called Toll Booth, which I've not read yet, but also on my TBR. And as a result of having read Hex, I'm definitely going to be reading that one. So it's basically a story about a modern day witch, or a woman with powers, who somehow floats through the ether to the past to and connects with a convicted witch called Gelis on the last day of her life, and it's under the rule of James I. So at a time when persecuting women for being witches was common, it was rife, and the story takes place over that night, that final night, as these two women interact and engage with each other. It's really beautiful, really powerful, and as I say, it doesn't take a lot of time to read, but really interesting themes about being a woman, about being a witch, and lots of ideas that are going to stick with me for a long time. Again, I thought it might be quite nice to read the opening of this, and interesting to know as well that the witch or the woman who's been persecuted and is sentenced to death for being a witch is actually based on a real life person from the witch trials. So really, really interesting. And as I say, it takes place right at the end of the 16th century. And this is from the point of view from our modern day narrator. I was out in the null. In perpetuity, it seemed. I was bodiless and formless until things began to appear. A row of oil-lit street lamps, a cobbled road sloping down, the moon a thin smile, city trees bending their boughs so far back, the winds wild, tall tenement buildings line the road to Castle Hill. A witch will die here in the morning. So it's really interesting and atmospheric in a way, because everything's taking place in a prison cell, and horrific as well, shocking in many respects, particularly when you think about Gellis being a real life historical character. So those are the first 5 books. I've got another 5 or 6 to tell you about in a later video. But it'd be really interesting, as I say, to know what you thought of those or whether they're on your list to be read. But in the meantime, do please like the video, do please share, and do please subscribe for more updates and book reviews. But thank you very much. Bye.